This is the draft room at Twin Cities Orthopedics Performance Center, home to your Minnesota Vikings. The draft is a month and a half from now, and this is our Combine special at Vikings.com. Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Paul Allen, joined by former Minnesota Viking Ben Leber. Sights and sounds from Indy, in-depth speculation on offensive linemen, defensive linemen, free agency, 18, and much more coming up. We just got back from Indianapolis with the 2019 Scouting Combine. We heard a lot. It's speculation central, a lot of buzz, and a lot of positive things that potentially could impact the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the number one thing was, what was Kyler Murray's height? It was going to be 5'9" or 5'10". And then after that, it was, wow, look at the depth of both the offensive line and the defensive line.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that going into the Combine. That's certainly something that we came out of.
We absolutely have a deep dive coming up on both those topics coming up very shortly. But first, some Vikings-related sights and sounds from the 2019 Combine.
It's great to be here again. Excited about getting a chance to look at these young players and how we can improve our football team.
People love the Scouting Combine, and so much of it's because it's that thought that what's to come for my team. You just start to dream about players, and you get excited, guys running around, and it gets the juices flowing.
We want to win, and when you can get a group of people together and a culture, and that starts with Coach Zimmer, the culture that we have set, that gives you the best chance to win, in my opinion.
You have to love to play this game, no matter if you're making $1 or $100 million. You have to love what you're doing. And if we can find guys that love to play football, then that is definitely one of the top criteria we're looking for.
Mike Zimmer is going to bring a good defense, and we'll see what happens with Everson Griffin and Xavier Rhodes. And, the frustrating part of this league is you can have great players, but because of money, they're going to have to go somewhere else. And so I'm interested to see how they can keep that thing functioning. Stephon Diggs was fantastic. Adam Thielen was outstanding. But, what does this offense morph into with Stefanski and all the tools that this team has? And Dalvin Cook, to me, is one of the best backs in the league. So how are you going to use him better next year?
If the best grade you have on a left tackle or whatever is, a second-round grade, you're not going to take that guy at 18. You're going to take whatever fits, the best evaluation for that spot, and then say, all right, we can take, a tackle in the second round or the third round. I mean, there's a lot of options, and to me, the Vikings are the way they are because they've drafted extremely well, and they haven't done that by reaching on guys.
I think what could happen at 18 is if you get a player who's on the defensive front, this D-line class is very, you could call them top-heavy, but it's deep, too. It's rich with a lot of talent. If you get a certain player who falls to you at that 18 spot, you might play him.
Second and third round, there are a lot of guards and centers that from what I understand, I'm not a scout, but like people I talk to, it certainly sounds like there's going to be a lot of guys who you're going to be able to plug in right away and are going to play in the league a long time.
Stefanski, again, I think he can be very successful. He's got to put his own stamp on it at the end of the day and figure out what he wants to be as an offensive play caller. Yeah, you listen to the Gary Kubiaks, you listen to Mike Zimmer as far as what they envision maybe as the big picture of the offense, but at the end of the day, he's got to find the formula and the nuts and bolts and plays and schemes that he likes.
They have some talent on defense where they can get after the quarterback on the other side of the ball, so let Kirk be comfortable, run the ball, and then let him get the ball to Dillard and Diggs, and I think they'll be okay.
Coach Zimmer's motto has always been, once you get here, I don't care who you are, you're going to get a fair shake, and if you're the best player that are going to help us win ball games, you're going to get an opportunity to show that.
It's almost like romantic for me that I can sit there. There's a sound bite for you.
And now a handful of observations from Indianapolis. Ben, what I think is interesting on a Combine special at Vikings.com focused on potential additions to the Minnesota Vikings. A major addition already has taken place. His name is Gary Kubiak. He's the assistant head coach and also offensive advisor. He's been to 7 Super Bowls. He won Super Bowl 50 as head coach of the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, and I tell you what, you guys told me that the Combine is a place where all the executives and coaches kind of let their hair down a little bit, can kind of be themselves. When we sat down with Mike Zimmer and we talked about Gary Kubiak, he lit up. He looked like a little kid. He was so excited. He was like, hey, the X's and O's portion of it, you get to peel the curtain back to see what these offenses are like. He's like, we can guess as defensive guys what these offenses are like, but to really sit there and look and know and hear about these offenses, he was just like, he was smiling ear to ear. He loves the philosophies, the knowledge, the expertise that he brings. So I think it's a win-win.
Boy, we heard a lot of good things about offensive linemen at the 2019 Combine in Indianapolis. Let's begin with Washington State's Andre Dillard.
Yeah, Andre Dillard, left tackle from Washington State. So get this stat, in 722 pass attempts last year, he gave up 1 sack from Washington State. So obviously very productive, extremely athletic player, very light on his feet, has great mirror drill at the Combine. You can see that as he plays. Doesn't play with a ton of punch, but has really strong hands. So like when guys get into him, you know, they're not able to get around him because he can latch on with his hands.
Yeah.
I love his footwork. He's just a very athletic guy, probably not a road grader type of guy, but if we think that this offensive system is going to be more reach blocking, playing out in space, I think this guy can run block and be a nice fit with the Vikings.
You know, perhaps the steamiest offensive lineman at the 2019 Combine was from North Carolina State. His name, Garret Bradbury. Outstanding story. Everything measured up well at the Combine for him. He did outstanding in the drills, tested very well from what we understand. This is a player that started playing defense, went to tight end, ended up at offensive line, and he can play center or guard. We heard a lot of great things about NC State's Garret Bradbury. To the other side of the trenches, the defensive line. Defensive ends, defensive tackles, nose tackles, 3 techniques we heard so much, including some really good stuff on this guy, Rashon Gary.
And Rashon Gary is a guy that you talk about defensive end, defensive tackle. Well, guess what? He can do both. He can slide up and down the defensive front. That's what he did at Michigan. The former #1 recruit in the country when he came out of high school. This guy's been highly touted for a long time. A self-proclaimed best player in the draft.
Yeah.
And at almost 6'5", 280 pounds, the guy is unbelievably quick. He's relentless. He plays with this mentality of getting into the backfield. As an outside rusher, the thing that I saw on tape was I love how strong his counter inside move was with his handwork. He's always fighting to get to the quarterback. And the stats maybe aren't there, but he was getting double teamed a lot, triple teamed, which is why Chase Winovich had such a big year for Michigan. But this guy alone as a player is a versatile player that can slide up and down the line and be disruptive.
You speak of versatility, Ed Oliver from Houston. Whoo, did we hear some great things about him. Ed Oliver is a 3 technique, the pass rushing defensive tackle, super fast. There were some people at the Combine who were saying if there is to be the next Aaron Donald, it could be Ed Oliver. If that's the case, he better go in the top 5, certainly the top 6. Let's go back to the offensive side of the equation and talk about tight ends, beginning with a nice one from Alabama.
Yeah, there's going to be a bunch of tight ends that come out. It's 3 top-heavy guys, 2 guys from Iowa and Irv Smith out of Alabama. Now, Irv is a complementary player. He can run block. He can be a guy at the end man on the line of scrimmage. He can be a guy that's an H-back type of guy that can move around the backfield and hit his blocks. That's where I think he's the most important, is because he can do that. He can finish his blocks, but he can also catch the football. 7 tight ends last year. That's a team record for Alabama. I don't think that he's the most fluid athlete out there, but he's definitely one of those guys that carries his pads well. He runs faster on the field, and he's really savvy about the top of his routes, breaking those things off.
Big Ten fans are very familiar with this guy. His name, Noah Fant. Played at the University of Iowa, runs 4.5, has excellent vertical skills. And from what we were told, when it comes to winning 50-50 battles and trying to bring in tightly contested passes, Noah Fant, absolutely fantastic. Very curious to see where he will be drafted. But like Ben intimated earlier, one of the bigger topics at the 2019 Combine was quarterback Kyler Murray, the Heisman Trophy award-winning quarterback from Oklahoma, and exactly how tall he is and where he'll be drafted. What do you think?
Well, he's curious to me because he comes from a great system that produced Baker Mayfield, and Baker blew everybody away with his anticipation, his knowledge of football, and his ability to create plays. Well, Kyler can absolutely create plays. He is more of a pocket passer than most people think, but my issue is not so much his height, but what I mentioned early, anticipation. I don't know if he anticipates throws as well as Baker did, and you have to do that in the NFL. Now, he's going to make some plays, creating, getting out on the edge. He's super dynamic, but that's a big problem for me, especially if they're thinking about him as at number one.
Well, and indeed, if Arizona is thinking about him at number one, last year they traded from 15 to 10, gave Oakland a third and a fifth to move up to get Josh Rosen. Then they paid him a lot of money. So to come back the next year and take a quarterback again, I mean, I can't say that's the most sound business decision I've ever heard.
No, it's really not. And there's a lot to be known about what Cliff Kingsbury is going to do in the NFL. What is his system going to be in the NFL? I think he's got a lot of things to figure out. I'm still a fan that Josh Rosen, I know he's got some personality issues, but he's a very talented quarterback, very accurate. That's the one thing you cannot coach sometimes is accuracy. He has all that. I think he could really flourish in a Kingsbury system.
Pete Bursich, analyst for the Vikings Radio Network, does a really good job breaking down all 22 film. He recently took a look at a couple of draft-worthy tight ends.
Right now, we're going to take a look at a couple pass catchers that are going to be available in the 2019 draft. TJ Hawkinson out of Iowa. He's a true tight end, lines up like a true tight end, but very, very versatile. Decent blocker, but his route running, catching, and then run after the catch abilities are very, very good. In this case, you're going to see him one-on-one with the linebacker in coverage. Does a great job right there of getting some extension, making sure he has some space going up, two hands, coming down with the football. So a good route runner, red zone target, that's what we're looking at tight ends. Coming across, we see this a lot with tight ends. You're trying to get him to the wide side of the field, get him in some space. This turns out to be just a simple out route, and it's run after the catch here. He's able to turn this thing up, make the first guy miss, keep his feet in bounds, and then gain an extra 10 or 12 yards. So those are the kinds of things, the athleticism that you're looking for in runs after catch. Again, Iowa, these are more pro NFL type formations, a true tight end lining up at the end of the offensive line. The premise here is the tight end, as he comes up the field, he's spying the safety, and then he has to find out which way and how flat he needs to go to get himself open. So you'll see him right here wind that thing, and his route comes real flat, and that's an excellent, excellent route. So you're seeing the ability of him to identify coverage, to adjust his route, to get open. And then, oh, by the way, we talked about run after the catch. You have a guy miss one tackle, and then he's off to the races. Safety can't catch him. Another guy we're going to take a look at, Irv Smith Jr. I played with his father at the University of Notre Dame. One of the toughest after the catch tight ends that I've seen. But his son is picking up where he left off. Nice job coming up underneath, two hands, going up and getting it and bringing it down. We're going to get a good look here. As Smith comes off the football, he's taking a look inside and outside. He's seen he has an inside-outside bracket, comes underneath, finds that space in the defense, finds the hole in the coverage, keeps his route running, goes up, hard throw, gets it, brings it down. So I think Smith is really, really good in space. You're going to see him here. He's flexed out kind of as a wide receiver. So four wide style of offense. Offensive coordinators love that kind of versatility where you can line a guy up a tight end or flank him out wide. But you're going to see him one-on-one with the safety. The safety has inside position. That's the key. You have a safety over the top, and this defender has inside position, but he still has the athleticism and strength to turn that shoulder and to get underneath and still make that catch. So with both of these guys, you're seeing outstanding athletes, good route runners, and they're smart. They know the coverages. They find the holes in those coverages, sure-handed, and they're both very good run after the catch. So pretty complete packages in both of these tight ends.
Great job by Pete Bursich and the Vikings Entertainment Network, taking a look at a couple of tight ends who most likely will both be drafted high in Irv Smith and TJ Hawkinson. When it comes to Hawkinson, we took a look at Noah Fant from Iowa earlier. What's different between Hawkinson and Fant?
Run blocking. That's the number one thing. I don't think Fant really wants to run block. He's more of your typical split out tight end. Now Hawkinson's a guy that you saw in the film that is going to line up with his hand on the ground in that D gap area just outside the tackle. And I think that's important, especially now if you look at, let's say, Vikings specifically. You think a lot of play action pass, a lot of boot game, a lot of stretch game is what we're guessing. In that stretch game, you can ask your tight end on the line of scrimmage to really sell that hard down block and then bust it out to the flat, get open, and you see what he can do run after catch. So he really is a complete tight end as well, just like Irv Smith.
Somebody's going to get a nice one in TJ Hawkinson when we return. we start looking at the Minnesota Vikings and the potential of some players at 18. This is the Combine Special from TCO Studios at Vikings.com.
Every fan has their favorite memories, from the pregame tailgate to the miracle moments. Relive your favorite memories or experience them for the first time at the Minnesota Vikings Museum. Ticket information at Vikings.com/museum.
It's something I've dreamed of my whole life.
Touchdown! I love this game. It's always been a part of my family.
I'm ready to show the world what I can do. On the field, I'm the best defensive player in the country.
Being able to do something that you love, something that you can't pass up.
All right, Vikings fans, I know you're trying to figure out where the Vikings should go when it comes to the draft, and there are three areas that you have to focus on: offensive line, tight end, and I'm going to go defensive tackle. Offensive line, you're probably thinking about an offensive tackle, someone that can protect the quarterback and make sure that Kirk Cousins is upright. Jonah Williams from Alabama is certainly in play. Jawan Taylor from Florida is another one that could be in play. And then keep an eye on Cody Ford from Oklahoma. This is a guy that is versatile. He can play outside but also kick in. At tight end, this class is loaded. Maybe Noah Fant for Iowa could be there. TJ Hawkinson can also be there from Iowa. And then one other guy, Irv Smith Jr. from Alabama. Any of those guys can fill the need. Then when you go on defense, defensive tackle could be a concern. Keep an eye on Dexter Lawrence from Clemson. Maybe Jeffrey Simmons from Mississippi State. Has an ACL injury, but he could be a guy that is certainly in play in the first round.
Some very good opinions from Bucky Brooks, former scout in the National Football League, currently with NFL Media. Welcome back to the Combine Special. Speaking of opinions, Daniel Jeremiah and Charles Davis with the NFL Network, they offered up these thoughts on the potential of the Vikings and round one.
Back here in Indianapolis, once again, it's Groundhog's Day at the NFL Scouting Combine. But we're talking Vikings here. And we look at this football team and look at their general manager, a guy you know extremely well. What do you think he's looking for? What is he looking to get accomplished here at the Combine?
Well, look, bottom line is this is a team that thought they could had a real shot at the Super Bowl last year, didn't make the playoffs. So readjusting the attitude, making sure they're fortifying what they do defensively and getting back to playing the full Mike Zimmer defense. You know, Anthony Barr may not be around, so you talk about a linebacker now that's a big deal for them. But he's going to have to be a do-it-all type linebacker, because the one thing I remember Mike Zimmer saying is, I really trust Anthony Barr, which meant I can put him in any situation, expect good play.
Yeah, I can do so many different things.
Yes.
You know, when I look at this team offensively, not being able to run the football, I think, was a big frustration for everybody in the organization, and that starts with that offensive line. You got to get better. You got to find some upgrades in those positions. So we look at where they're positioned in the draft and look throughout the draft. I think there's a lot of good options along the interior of the offensive line, as well as you can find tackles a little bit deeper on in the group. Anybody at all that jump out to you that you can see as a fit with this football team?
Well, I can see a number of them, but because the way that Mike Zimmer talked about running the football and being physical and knocking people to the side, he's not going to be at the top of the draft. But we saw a kid who played at Charlotte.
Oh, I love him. The frog stance.
By the name of Nate Davis, who was as physical an offensive guard as we saw, I think, at the Senior Bowl. He fits what they want to get done, plus that type of attitude. Look, Quentin Nelson, what he did for the Colts last year and how he transformed the offense, I'm not saying it's that type of transformation. But that's the attitude I think Mike Zimmer's looking for. Plus, this is a guy that really enjoys hitting people. I mean, he enjoys knocking people on the ground.
No question. Another one who does that is McGovern there at Penn State.
Oh, yes.
Who is a mauler, is a physical mauler. And you look at the makeup of that offensive line, adding a little bit more of that, I think would make some sense there. The tight end position, I know you can find some depth throughout this draft at the tight end position. Man, we get into, you want
one of the two Iowa guys?
Yeah, that's fine. Any of the two Iowa guys would be home run picks. But we kind of looking in that second, third round. I'll give you some names.
Okay.
And just tell me who stands out to you, who you could see fitting in this offense there. Kahale Waring from San Diego State. You got Dalton Knox from Ole Miss. We've got Jace Sternberger from Texas A&M. 3 names there. Who do you like? You think would be a fit with this football team?
I really like Sternberger from Texas A&M. I like it. I like his length. I like his ability to get downfield and make plays. I like a kid who's kind of knocked around a little bit in college because remember he had to change places, change schools, so he knows how to deal with a little bit of that toughness and adversity because Zim's going to lay it on him. So he's a kid that jumps out to me if we're talking about that type of a range because trying to get one of those kids from Iowa, a Fant or a Hawkinson, that might be a little bit tougher. But I like the guys you threw out there. I think any one of those 3 would be a really good fit.
Daniel Jeremiah, Charles Davis with some interesting thoughts involving the Minnesota Vikings. Welcome back to the Combine Special. Ben Leber, Paul Allen, now joined by Wabi from Vikings.com and Courtney Cronin from ESPN and ESPN.com, where we are thinking just like you. What position do the Vikings significantly consider early in the draft?
Well, what's their biggest need? Offensive line. And I know that I should go and try to appease this fan base by picking for them at 18 and thinking that they're going to go rounds 1, 2, and 3 O-line. But when you take a look at where they're picking, that's a spot where I'm not necessarily sure what they have on their board would match drafting right there at 18. Unless you can get Jonah Williams to fall out of the top 15 and maybe to 18 because he seems like the most versatile lineman that would possibly be available for them. I think that you might need to take a look at this defensive line class. It's loaded, not just at the top, but quite a bit throughout. And I don't think when you look at the top 10, that Quinnen Williams, Jeffrey Simmons, Christian Wilkins, Rashon Gary, Ed Oliver, they're not all going in the top 10. If you can get one of those guys to fall at 18, I think you have to go defensive line, especially since you might not be able to keep Sheldon Richardson. Obviously, we don't know how free agency is going to play out. But if you can get his day one replacement at 18, you've got to do it.
What do you think, buddy?
Yeah, I think we spend so much time talking about the first round pick. That's all we talk about leading up to the draft. I think it's the easiest pick for teams. Because they just say, okay, well, who's the highest guy left on our board when we're on the clock? We're not taking the 24th best player
It's so easy,
at
Bobby.
18. We're taking the best player on the board at 18. And it really doesn't matter what position he takes, what position he plays. Plus, if Courtney, if you're right and the team is saying offensive line is our biggest need, they're going to predetermine their action in free agency and address the offensive line there. They're not going to predetermine what position they take at 18. They're going to take the highest rated player. That's why Spielman sends his scouts out all year round to grade these players, to put grades on them, and you take the best one when you're on the clock.
What do you think, Ben?
I don't think you overthink it. I think you have to go offensive line. It's a deep offensive line class, but I don't know if it's deep enough to go all the way down the second round to the 50th pick where the Vikings have their second pick. Do you find a high quality starter at number 50? I don't know if you can. Obviously, you got to see how everything plays out. And Courtney, I agree with you. I'm a defensive guy. I think that you still have to build through your defensive line. And, Linval did not have a great year. Sheldon may or may not be on the team. So you could find a 3-technique replacement, and it could be a high level replacement there at 18. But I think this is one of those drafts, you don't overthink it. If you can find a Cody Ford that can really reestablish the mentality of the offense, be that guy that can run downhill and hit you in the mouth, and be a pass protector, or an Andre Dillard, one of those guys. Jawan Taylor's a fantastic player too. So if he falls there, it's going to be hard to pass up those guys and go with defense or somebody else.
And I think at 50, you might be able to get someone like an Andre, not maybe Andre Dillard, I think he's probably a little bit higher. Greg Little. I think that would be a perfect pick for them at 50, where you could get somebody who might not be able to play right now, or at least early on, maybe take that same Brian O'Neill route, but somebody that you could potentially get in there. They need pass protectors. They need guys who are nasty enough to be able to battle linebackers at the second level. They need that type of athleticism, and I think there is quite a bit of it in this draft class, and that you could get good value at 50 with the offense.
What about at 30? Can't you call some teams and see if anyone wants to get out at the end of the first round?
Right.
I mean, Rick's done that in the past.
Yeah, I mean,
you could certainly trade back.
If you trade back, I mean, now everything.
No, I'm saying you get 2 in the first round.
You
come
say
back in from the second
back
round.
in.
If you think your need is that big along the offensive line, and you've taken a defensive player at 18, there's nothing that stops you from getting back in the first round.
And what makes this entire process interesting is free agency takes place before the draft. So whether it's a bargain, whether it's a splash, whatever happens in free agency could dictate even the way the early stages of the draft go. Now, with the Vikings in free agency, the franchise tag deadline has come and gone. and the Vikings did not franchise Anthony Barr or Sheldon Richardson. Courtney, how do you read into that?
Well, it's expensive to do it to begin with, and we know that this team is strapped for cash right now. I mean, in order to create salary cap space, you have to make some really tough decisions that are probably going on upstairs in the front office as we speak, trying to restructure guys, maybe trying to move on from certain players. But in order to create space, you have to cut down. And I think that with a guy like Anthony Barr, it's going to be very tough to just find his automatic replacement. I mean, it's a guy who, size alone, looks like a defensive end, has played in this system since Mike Zimmer got here, is a staple of this defense, is kind of the captain there in the middle of the field, calling out plays, calling checks. It's not necessarily say go find Anthony Barr's replacement in this draft. But what I think you could do, given the value of 4-3 outside linebackers in Mike Zimmer's defense, you might be able to go a little bit more of that rotational role. Use a guy like Eric Wilson, draft Barr's replacement maybe somewhere in the 2nd to 4th round, get good value for that pick, because let's face it, they're in their nickel a lot of times. You need guys who can not just cover the back end, but be really good in, against the pass too.
Yeah, I think free agency, you always have to be very careful. There can be some fool's gold in free agency, and then there can be guys in the 2nd and 3rd wave that you really hit on. I mean, did anyone really celebrate Tom Johnson's signing in 2014? Not really, but I think you look back at the last few seasons of Vikings defense, Tom Johnson's been a pretty good player. Here's a name that I don't think is going to get a lot of attention early on. There's a defensive tackle for the Patriots named Malcolm Brown. I don't think a lot of people really know a lot about him. He has 62 starts for the Patriots since he was drafted.
Texas.
He's played in 3 Super Bowls. You can find guys like that in the 2nd and 3rd waves of free agency who can help your team.
And that's where I was going to go too, is because we are so cash strapped with this salary cap that I'm looking at guys that are going to be cheaper options. I like a guy like Christian Covington out of the Texans, a 3 technique who came out of Rice, smaller school, but high motor guy, great fundamentals, a guy that I think Andre Patterson could really turn into a nice player and could be a solid foundational player for this defense. Then you get an injury-prone guy like Tyler Eifert, bottom of your screen there. Yes, he's injury-prone, has familiarity with Mike Zimmer in Cincinnati, could be a guy that is athletic enough to fit into the system as well. And then a linebacker, Jake Ryan out of Green Bay. I really like the fact that he's coming off his ACL, and he's a player that is not Anthony Barr, but I think that is athletic enough and can fill that hole for the time being.
With the defensive line, that 3 technique position is so important to what Mike Zimmer wants to do defensively that when we talk about Sheldon Richardson, whether he'll be in Minnesota or whether he's going to go move on elsewhere, I think that you just have to look at the emphasis they've placed on getting him last year in free agency and what he does for the rest of the defensive line. Like, there's a reason that they want to keep him here so badly, because he makes that entire unit go. He's able to keep the quarterback high in the pocket so the defensive ends can come in and do their jobs. That's not a position that you want to become a revolving door. You mentioned a guy like Tom Johnson, Wabi. I think that the Vikings would definitely be interested in bringing him back in that rotational role, but you still need your day one guy, somebody who's going to be in there in a primary role. And I mean, it's going to be tough to replace Sheldon Richardson if he walks, which is why I think there's going to be concerted effort to keep him here.
Free agents, draft picks, free agents. Let's put a bow on this by asking, with the 2019 Vikings, where do you think the bigger impact will be made? With free agents or with draft picks?
I think it's going to be with draft picks. And again, I'm going off this notion that there's not a lot of money to spend. And if they can free up some cash and some cap space, and they can find a guy that they think they can plug in right now, then yeah, I think the free agent market is going to be important. But I don't think you're going to find a lot of them. You may find one guy out of a couple. I think the draft is where you're going to build this team. And again, this goes back all the way to the end of the season when Mike Zimmer had his postseason press conference. He says, first and foremost, I want attitude on this football team. I need to bring an edge to this football team. I think in the draft, they find guys with personality, they find guys with an edge, and that's going to reestablish the whole culture of this team.
I think you'd be real hard pressed to make a case for free agency with the way Rick Spielman and this staff like to build a team. I mean, look how, yes, Linval Joseph, great free agent signing. There are examples like that on this team, but this team is where it has been under Mike Zimmer because of how they have drafted, and that's going to be the case this season. I don't know if they'll come back into the first round and have 2 first-round picks. I'm not saying it's going to be that splashy, but I think the Vikings are going to get probably 2 starters, one at 18 and one at 50 in this draft.
Yeah. And you don't count out Rick Spielman in the draft as somebody who's going to probably get you some more draft picks. I mean,
Absolutely.
That's his MO in April in those 3 days. And I wouldn't be surprised, like Wabi's saying, if he's able to get more high draft capital. Because if you want to fix this offensive line through free agency, the names are not that great right now. I mean, Matt Paradis, I had a few others here. What am I looking at? Roger Saffold, Mitch Morse. I mean, those guys are, if you're 27 and plus looking up ahead at free agency, I don't know if you want to go overspend on that. Of course, someone's going to pay Roger Saffold a ton of money here in free agency. Is it the smartest option when you can build through the draft and possibly get more draft capital to go get the offensive line where it needs to be and get pass protectors? I'm not so sure.
Here's another aspect of roster building, too, is player development. I mean, Holton Hill. Probably a guy who's going to have an opportunity to step up and play. Eric Wilson got that opportunity last year. How about Jalen Holmes, who was a mid-round pick out of Ohio State last year? I mean, you have to develop players. The Vikings have done a good job with that. I think, Ben, you talked about Andre Patterson and the work he's done with some of our defensive linemen. That's another aspect of building a roster that you have to be good at, and that will play a factor this offseason.
It's all very fascinating. Free agency first, then a month and a half from now, that draft room you saw atop the Combine Special, filled with elite football minds, making the 2019 Vikings better. Courtney Cronin, Ben Leber, Wabi, Paul Allen, thank you very much for watching our Combine Special. As we depart, here are the opinions of some NFL experts regarding the Vikings and pick 18.
Vikings at 18, offensive line, pretty much a lock.
I would say that's towards the top of the list. I do think offensive line, not only for the run game, but to protect your biggest asset, which is Kirk Cousins, makes a lot of sense.
I would never rule out the idea that Zim could take a defensive player, especially, if they wind up losing Anthony Barr, then, I think there's a hole there. And the makeup of the draft, too, could put you in a position where you say to yourself, okay, we could capitalize on a good player here and still get a good offensive lineman in the second or third round.
But if you lose Anthony Barr, you may need help at linebacker. If Sheldon Richardson's a free agent, may need help at defensive tackle. So those are the three positions I would say. If they don't come away with an offensive lineman, linebacker, or defensive tackle with that first pick, I'd be floored.
If you get a certain player who falls to you at that 18 spot, you might play him. And let's not forget Sheldon Richardson. He's a free agent. We don't know what's going to happen there. Anthony Barr, maybe it's an edge rusher that's just too good to pass up. That situation could play itself out. Mike Zimmer's got a background as being a secondary guy. Maybe all of a sudden you get one of those quarterbacks you're looking at.
I think the Vikings specifically looking at the offensive line. And then, as good as the defense is, there is no such thing as a team that has too many pass rushers. So pass rush could be on the mind of every single team in the NFL. And we know Mike Zimmer loves his linebackers, defensive backs.